It started on an otherwise uneventful Tuesday morning. I was sipping coffee on my porch, watching the world wake up, when I noticed the tow truck pulling into my driveway. At first, I thought they had the wrong address, but then I saw Karen. She was striding purposefully across my lawn, her clipboard in hand, her expression smug and unyielding. Karen had always been a thorn in everyone's side. As the self-appointed president of the homeowner association, she ruled with an iron fist, issuing fines for the smallest infractions and enforcing arbitrary rules with relentless zeal. But this time, she had gone too far. "What's going on?" I called out, walking towards her as the tow truck driver hooked up my pickup. Karen didn't even look up. "Your vehicle is in violation of the new homeowner association regulations," she said dismissively. "Gasoline cars are no longer allowed in the neighborhood. It's an environmental initiative." My jaw dropped. "You can't be serious. That's my truck, and it's parked on my property." "The rules apply to everyone," she replied with a condescending smile. "You should have read the memo. The vote passed last week." "What memo? I didn't receive anything." Karen raised an eyebrow, her expression dripping with mock sympathy. "Perhaps you should check your email more often. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to." As the tow truck began to pull away, I felt a surge of anger unlike anything I'd experienced before. This wasn't just about my truck. It was about principle. Karen and her cronies had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Later that day, I dug through my emails, but there was nothing about a vote or a rule change. Frustrated, I decided to confront Karen directly. Her house was easy to spot. It was the largest one on the street, its perfectly manicured lawn a testament to her obsession with appearances. She answered the door with her usual air of superiority. "What is it now, Jack?" "Don't play games with me," I said, holding up my phone. "There's no record of any memo or vote. You can't just make up rules and expect everyone to follow them." Karen's smile didn't waver. "The board approved the changes. It's not my fault if you're out of the loop." "Who else is on this board?" I demanded. "I've never seen a meeting, never been invited to one." She shrugged. "Perhaps you should attend the next quarterly meeting. Until then, I suggest you comply with the rules." Fuming, I stormed back to my house. Something wasn't right. Karen's smugness, the lack of communication, the sudden enforcement of a bizarre rule, it all pointed to something bigger. That evening, I noticed something unusual. A group of contractors was unloading equipment on the vacant lot adjacent to my property. Curious, I walked over to ask what they were doing. "Just following orders," one of them said, avoiding eye contact. "Orders from who?" Karen, of course. The next morning, the sound of construction woke me up. They were building a fence that encroached several feet onto my property. Furious, I called the local zoning office, but they told me the permits were in order. How could that be? When I confronted Karen about it, she feigned innocence. "The fence is for the community garden," she said sweetly. "It's all perfectly legal." "That's my land, one-on-ones," I shouted. "You can't just take it." "If you have a problem, take it up with the board," she replied, turning on her heel and walking away. Things escalated quickly after that. The next week, my electricity was mysteriously cut off. When I called the power company, they claimed there was an issue with my account. Coincidence? I didn't think so. Then came the fines. Karen started citing me for everything. An overgrown lawn, which wasn't true, improper trash disposal, also false, and even the color of my mailbox. Each fine came with a threat of legal action if I didn't pay immediately. I knew I needed help. I reached out to a lawyer, but even he seemed hesitant to take on the homeowner association. "They've got deep pockets and strong connections," he warned. "This could get messy." The final straw came when I discovered forged documents claiming that I had signed over a portion of my property to the homeowner association. It was an obvious fake, but proving it would take time and money, two things Karen was counting on me not having. I decided to fight fire with fire. Late one night, I began digging into public records, looking for anything that could expose Karen and her cronies. What I found shocked me: financial discrepancies, unauthorized expenditures, and backroom deals with local contractors. Karen wasn't just power-hungry, she was corrupt to the core. Armed with this information, I knew I had a chance to turn the tables. But it wouldn't be easy. Karen had allies everywhere, and she wouldn't go down without a fight. The morning after my late-night research session, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The information I uncovered about Karen and the homeowner association's shady dealings was a goldmine. But exposing them would require careful planning and, most importantly, allies. I couldn't take on Karen alone. My first call was to my neighbor, Tom. Tom and I weren't particularly close, but he had his own issues with the homeowner association. They had fined him for having unauthorized solar panels on his roof, despite state laws encouraging renewable energy. If anyone understood my frustration, it was him. "I've been waiting for someone to stand up to those bullies," Tom said after I laid out what I'd found. "Count me in." We decided to start a neighborhood meeting to gather more homeowners who might be willing to push back. To our surprise, nearly a dozen people showed up, each with their own horror stories about Karen and the homeowner association. There was Linda, who'd been fined for planting the wrong type of flowers in her front yard, and Marcus, whose backyard shed had been deemed structurally unsound, despite passing city inspections. It became clear that Karen's reign of terror extended far beyond my driveway. She was using the homeowner association as her personal fiefdom, and the board members, if they even existed, were complicit. With the neighborhood support, Tom and I decided to confront Karen publicly. The next quarterly meeting of the homeowner association was scheduled for the following week. According to the bylaws, any homeowner could attend and raise issues. It was the perfect opportunity to present the evidence I'd gathered. In the meantime, we started preparing. I printed copies of the financial discrepancies and shady contracts I'd uncovered. Tom drafted a speech outlining the homeowner association's abuses of power. Linda, who had a knack for public speaking, agreed to present the group's grievances. We were ready to shine a light on Karen's corruption. But Karen wasn't going to make it easy. 2 days before the meeting, I found a note taped to my front door. It was typed with no signature, but the message was clear: drop it or else. I wasn't intimidated. If anything, it confirmed that we were on the right track. But the threats didn't stop there. That evening, Tom's car windows were smashed, and someone spray-painted homeowner association rules across the hood. Linda received a call from an anonymous number warning her to stay out of homeowner association business. It was obvious that Karen, or someone working for her, was trying to scare us into silence. But instead of backing down, our resolve grew stronger. If she thought intimidation would work, she clearly didn't know who she was dealing with. The day of the meeting arrived, and the atmosphere was tense. The community center where the meeting was held was packed. Karen sat at the front of the room, flanked by a few loyal supporters. She looked as smug as ever, confident that her position was unassailable. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, my hands trembling slightly but my voice steady. "For too long, this homeowner association has operated without transparency or accountability," I began. "But today, that changes." I handed out copies of the documents I'd found, pointing out the financial irregularities and unauthorized expenditures. "These are the actions of someone who believes they're above the rules," I said, locking eyes with Karen. "But this community deserves better." Tom followed, detailing the ways Karen had manipulated the association to serve her own interests. Linda's speech brought the room to its feet as she recounted her experiences and called for a vote of no confidence in Karen's leadership. For a moment, it seemed like we might win. The crowd was clearly on our side, murmuring in agreement and nodding as we spoke. But Karen wasn't done yet. "These accusations are baseless," she said, standing up and addressing the room. "This is nothing more than a smear campaign orchestrated by a few disgruntled homeowners who can't follow the rules." She produced her own set of documents, carefully crafted to discredit me. According to her, I had a history of violations that made my complaints invalid. She even had a forged letter suggesting I had agreed to the fence construction. The room fell silent. For a moment, doubt flickered across the faces of the homeowners. Karen had played her hand well, but I wasn't going to let her win. "If that's true," I said, stepping forward, "why don't we let an independent auditor review everything? If you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to hide." Karen hesitated, her confident facade cracking ever so slightly. She knew as well as I did that an audit would expose her corruption. The room erupted in chatter, with several homeowners voicing their support for the idea. Sensing the tide turning against her, Karen tried to regain control. "This meeting is over," she declared, grabbing her clipboard and storming out. But the damage was done. The homeowners weren't going to let her off the hook that easily. As the crowd began to disperse, Tom clapped me on the back. "You did good, Jack," he said. "But this isn't over." He was right. Karen might have retreated, but the fight was far from finished. We had taken the first step. but there was still a long way to go to reclaim our neighborhood from her iron grip. The days following the meeting were tense. Karen's retreat from the community center felt like a victory, but I knew better than to underestimate her. She was cunning and vindictive, and the battle was far from over. True to form, Karen wasted no time in launching a counterattack. 2 mornings after the meeting, I found a letter taped to my door. It was an official notice from the homeowner association accusing me of violating the community's noise ordinances. The letter cited reports from neighbors about loud construction noises coming from my property. The kicker? I wasn't even doing any construction. I immediately called Tom, who told me he'd received a similar notice, this time accusing him of parking violations. Linda, too, was being targeted, fined for having an unauthorized garden swing in her backyard. Karen was systematically going after anyone who had spoken against her at the meeting. "She's trying to break us," Linda said when we gathered to compare notes. "If she can't silence us, she'll bury us in fines and legal fees." Rather than give in, we decided to escalate our efforts. Linda suggested starting a neighborhood petition to demand Karen's removal. With Tom's help, we drafted the document, listing our grievances and calling for an emergency vote to elect new leadership for the homeowner association. The response was overwhelming. Within days, we had signatures from nearly half the neighborhood. Many residents shared stories of their own run-ins with Karen and her heavy-handed tactics. The momentum was on our side, but Karen wasn't going down without a fight. One evening, as I was collecting signatures, I noticed a black SUV idling near my house. It didn't belong to any of my neighbors. The next morning, I found my mailbox smashed, the petition papers inside scattered across my lawn. It was a clear message: back off. But instead of scaring me, it only strengthened my resolve. Tom had a friend who worked as a private investigator, and we decided it was time to bring in the professionals. We handed over the documents I'd uncovered, along with the accounts from other homeowners. If Karen thought she could intimidate us into submission, she was sorely mistaken. A week later, the investigator came back with more dirt than we'd ever expected. Karen had been funneling homeowner association funds into a personal account, using the money to pay for vacations and home renovations. Even worse, she had signed contracts with her husband's construction company, awarding them lucrative deals for unnecessary projects like the community garden fence. The evidence was damning. With the help of a lawyer, we compiled everything into a formal complaint and submitted it to the state's housing authority. But we didn't stop there. We also made copies of the report and distributed them to every homeowner in the neighborhood. If Karen wanted a war, she was about to get one. The backlash was immediate. Homeowners who had previously been too afraid to speak up were now rallying against Karen. For the first time, she looked genuinely rattled. At the next homeowner association meeting, she tried to defend herself, claiming the allegations were fabricated. But the evidence was too overwhelming. "You can't trust these people," she said, pointing at me, Tom, and Linda. "They're just trying to cause chaos in our community." Her words fell flat. One by one, residents stood up to share their stories. Marcus recounted how Karen had forced him to tear down his shed. Linda spoke about the fines for her garden swing. Even residents who had stayed silent until now began voicing their grievances. Realizing she was losing control, Karen resorted to a last-ditch effort. She announced that she had contacted her lawyer and would be suing for defamation. It was a transparent attempt to scare us, but it didn't work. If anything, it only fueled the community's anger. The emergency vote was held the following week. Karen tried every trick in the book to sway the outcome, from bribing homeowners with promises of waived fines to spreading rumors about me and my allies. But it wasn't enough. When the ballots were counted, the result was clear. Karen was out. The room erupted into cheers as the announcement was made. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt united. Karen stormed out, her face red with fury. But no one cared. Her reign of terror was over. With Karen gone, the neighborhood began to heal. We elected a new board, made up of homeowners who were committed to transparency and fairness. The bogus rules and fines were repealed, and the stolen funds were recovered and used to improve the community. As for me, I finally felt at peace. The battle had been long and exhausting, but it was worth it. We had stood up to a bully and won. And while Karen's threats still lingered in the back of my mind, I knew we were stronger together. Karen's removal from the homeowner association felt like a hard-fought victory, but the aftermath was anything but calm. The neighborhood was still reeling from the years of her oppressive rule, and as the newly elected board began untangling the web of corruption, the true extent of her misdeeds came to light. The most shocking revelation was the financial damage. Karen had embezzled tens of thousands of dollars, funneling funds into personal accounts and fake community projects. The community garden, the fence, and the security upgrades were all fronts for her schemes. The neighborhood's reserves were nearly depleted, leaving little for essential maintenance. Adding to the chaos, Karen's defamation lawsuit against me and my allies moved forward. While we knew it was a desperate move on her part, it forced us to spend time and resources defending ourselves. The lawsuit became a rallying point for the remaining pockets of Karen's supporters, who accused us of orchestrating a witch hunt. Despite being ousted, Karen wasn't done causing trouble. Strange things began happening in the neighborhood. Tires were slashed, mailboxes vandalized, and threatening notes left on doorsteps. While there was no direct evidence linking Karen to these incidents, the timing was too convenient to ignore. One night, as I was locking up my house, I heard footsteps outside. Grabbing a flashlight, I stepped onto the porch and caught a shadowy figure running down the street. They dropped something as they fled, and when I picked it up, my heart sank. It was a copy of our neighborhood petition with my name circled in red ink. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with Tom, Linda, and the new board members. We agreed that it was time to involve the authorities. The local police, initially reluctant to get involved in what they saw as a neighborhood dispute, finally agreed to investigate after a string of anonymous complaints. The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. Karen had been using a network of loyal supporters to carry out her retaliation. These individuals, many of whom owed her favors or were complicit in her schemes, had been acting as her enforcers. The police arrested 2 of them for vandalism, but Karen managed to evade direct charges by denying involvement. However, the lawsuit against us turned out to be Karen's undoing. During the court proceedings, our lawyers subpoenaed her financial records. What we found was the smoking gun, undisputable evidence of her embezzlement and fraudulent activities. With this new evidence, we countersued for damages, and the court froze her assets pending investigation. Karen's arrogance finally caught up with her. Facing mounting legal troubles and public humiliation, she fled the neighborhood. But her departure wasn't the end of the story. With Karen gone, the new board faced the monumental task of rebuilding trust and repairing the damage. Our first priority was restoring the community's finances. We implemented transparent budgeting practices, held regular meetings, and kept everyone informed about our progress. One of our biggest victories came when we recovered a portion of the embezzled funds through the court case. The money was used to address long overdue maintenance projects and to establish a reserve fund to prevent future crises. The community garden, once a symbol of Karen's corruption, was transformed into a real shared space, maintained by volunteers. The atmosphere in the neighborhood began to change. People who had once been divided by Karen's tactics started coming together. Block parties, volunteer days, and open forums became regular events, fostering a sense of unity that had been missing for years. Just as things were settling down, I received an unexpected call from the private investigator we'd hired earlier. "Jack, you need to see this," he said, his voice urgent. When I arrived at his office, he laid out a series of documents on the table. "Karen's not done," he said. "She's trying to set up a new homeowner association in another neighborhood. She's using a different name, but it's her." My stomach churned. The thought of Karen inflicting the same misery on another community was unbearable. But what could we do? Legally, we had no jurisdiction over her activities outside our neighborhood. The investigator leaned back in his chair. "You could warn them. Let them know who they're dealing with." It was a risky move. Karen could claim harassment, and I'd already had enough legal battles to last a lifetime. But as I thought about the people who might suffer under her control, I knew I couldn't stay silent. The decision wasn't easy, but with the board's support, we reached out to the leaders of the neighborhood Karen was targeting. Armed with the evidence from our own ordeal, we presented a detailed account of her actions. The response was mixed. Some were grateful for the warning, while others accused us of meddling in affairs that didn't concern us. Karen, predictably, denied everything and threatened to sue for defamation again. But this time, she didn't have the same power she once wielded. As the weeks passed, we heard rumors that Karen had abandoned her plans for the new homeowner association. Whether it was because of our warning or her mounting legal troubles, we couldn't be sure. But one thing was clear: she wasn't invincible. The experience left a lasting impact on me and my neighbors. We had faced a seemingly insurmountable challenge and come out stronger for it. The neighborhood was no longer just a collection of houses. It was a community united by a shared determination to stand up for what was right. As I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sun set over the now peaceful streets, I felt a sense of pride and relief. We had fought for our home, and we had won. Karen might still be out there, but as long as we stayed vigilant, I knew we could handle whatever came next. Months passed, and life in the neighborhood began to return to normal. The new homeowner association board operated with transparency and fairness, and the community felt more united than ever. However, the specter of Karen lingered like a shadow. Despite her apparent defeat, whispers of her next moves reached us from time to time. We knew she wouldn't stay quiet forever. One day I received a call from a neighboring community. The voice on the other end was hurried and anxious. "Is this Jack Carter?" the woman asked. "We heard about what happened in your neighborhood with Karen. She's here now, trying to take over our homeowner association. We need your help." At that moment, I realized that Karen's story wasn't just ours. It was part of a larger pattern. She preyed on communities using fear, manipulation, and corruption to bend people to her will. If we didn't act, she would continue her cycle of destruction. I gathered Tom, Linda, and the rest of the board to discuss the situation. Initially, some were hesitant. "We've already been through so much," Linda said. "Do we really want to dive back into this mess?" "If we don't," I replied, "she'll just keep doing this to other neighborhoods. We have a chance to stop her for good." In the end, the decision was unanimous. We would help the neighboring community fight back. Armed with our experiences, evidence, and the lessons we had learned, we set out to confront Karen once more. The first step was to gather as much information as possible. The neighboring community had already started documenting Karen's actions. Questionable rule changes, sudden fines, and attempts to install herself as the de facto leader of their homeowner association. It was eerily familiar. We shared our evidence with them, showing how Karen had operated in our neighborhood. The parallels were undeniable, and it helped galvanize their resolve. Together, we built a comprehensive case detailing her pattern of behavior and the harm she had caused. The neighboring community held an emergency homeowner association meeting to address Karen's actions. This time, we were there as witnesses and allies. The room was packed, with residents eager to have their voices heard. Karen, seated at the front, looked uncharacteristically nervous. As the meeting began, one by one, residents stood up to share their grievances. They spoke of arbitrary fines, threats, and a lack of transparency. Then it was my turn. "Karen," I said, looking her directly in the eye, "we've seen this all before. You tried to tear our neighborhood apart, and now you're doing the same here. But this time, we're ready for you." I presented the evidence we'd gathered, laying out her pattern of corruption and manipulation. The room buzzed with anger and disbelief as the residents saw the full extent of her schemes. Faced with overwhelming evidence and a united community, Karen tried to fight back. She accused me of lying and claimed that she was the victim of a coordinated smear campaign. But her words fell on deaf ears. The neighboring community voted unanimously to remove her from the homeowner association and filed a formal complaint with the state housing authority. Legal action followed swiftly, bolstered by the evidence we had provided. Karen's reign of terror was finally coming to an end. As I drove home that night, I felt a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. We had fought not just for our neighborhood, but for others as well. Karen had been stopped, at least for now, and the communities she had targeted could begin to heal. In the weeks that followed, I reflected on everything we had been through. The experience had taught me the power of unity and the importance of standing up for what's right. It wasn't just about defeating Karen, it was about building something stronger in her wake. Life in our neighborhood continued to improve. The funds we had recovered were put to good use, and the new board remained committed to fairness and transparency. The community garden flourished, block parties became a regular occurrence, and neighbors who had once been divided now worked together to make the neighborhood better for everyone. As for Karen, she faded into the background. Her influence diminished and her schemes exposed. While I knew she might try to resurface someday, I also knew that we'd be ready for her. We had faced the worst she could throw at us and come out stronger for it. Sitting on my porch one evening, watching the sun set over the peaceful streets, I felt a sense of closure. The battle was over, and we had won. But more importantly, we had proven that even in the face of corruption and intimidation, a united community could overcome anything.